So would it be fair to say then that you are an anonymous a member or an anon, but with morals, with
yes.
direction?
I would like to think so, yes, very much so.
And what can you foresee? I mean, obviously there's a lot can come out of an organic collective like Anonymous, but what do you foresee the future evolution of the collective as being, if any?
The future evolution, that's such an interesting point, because it is a question of evolution. It's a continuous evolving organism, if I can describe it like that. You know, I mean, we're all, I think plenty of people are familiar with the origins of Anonymous, you know, and 4chan and all that sort of thing. But that was never where I was coming from. I mean, I'm not a gamer, I don't do that sort of, I haven't got time, to be honest with you. I get enough invites, but it's down to time. So, you know, it's like anything else, things evolve. I mean, the Model T Ford has evolved. You know, today's car will evolve into, I don't know, derivatives of the Volkswagen XL1. You know, that itself will evolve into something different in a few years down the road. So I think there is an issue that Anonymous is a growing organism. I think the problem lies in understanding its sense of individual perspective as in relation to a group as a whole. Let me explain that. We have this notion that we have no leaders, for example. I say notion, I'm just using this in very broad terms. And true, we don't have any leaders, that's understood, and the logic behind that is understood. But by the same token, we have people, and we fight obviously for the freedom of the internet. Perfect. So we're into freedom of speech and we're into democracy. Those are two things that sit very well with me, obviously. But there are many different segments within Anonymous, I think, with different attitudes, different core beliefs, different values. And those individual groups within Anonymous should be allowed, if we're going to preach democracy, to be able to share and evolve their ideas within the Anon framework to see whether or not it can gain greater critical mass throughout the movement, for want of a better word. Now, if that happens, that's fine, but it shouldn't be a question of you can't do this because we're going to come and hack you, right? I mean, hacking is a separate subject, but I think if we start to hack each other as people, you know, we've really lost it. We're sort of arguing with each other, and that's exactly what government wants. You know, what we see, broadly speaking, with these arguments is exactly in line with how the government likes its divide and rule process. No question at all, because ultimately, if we're arguing about minutiae, if we're, for example, arguing about, I don't know, the EDL, good point. Yeah. Now the EDL has its own fan base, if that's the right word. It has its followers, and there are many people in Anonymous that profoundly disagree with their politics, as would I. But am I going to waste my time dealing with that particular aspect when the central focus should be government? If you deal with government and you deal with it properly and fairly, and there's a whole range of things that have to be done to get to that point, but if we deal with it fairly, then we are setting a better example. And should we not be the ones setting a better example to society, given the power and control that we have collectively over our abilities with the internet, things that we can do, if we use our abilities and our knowledge for good purpose, right, there is no question that Anonymous will continue to grow. It's already the fastest growing movement in the world by none. Okay. Fact. Okay. The fact is, there are many people who are still not sure. They have a sneaking admiration for Anonymous. They support Anonymous. They like the idea. They want the mask, but they're afraid to get involved because they haven't yet understood what it is that Anonymous wants to do. Because wherever they look, there's a different Anonymous group, as it were, wanting to do a particular thing. You know, someone wants to hold a march, someone else wants to go and do an Occupy, someone else has got something else. So you become almost sort of conflicting, sort of, well, where should I be? What page should I be on? You know, well, that's where we have to sort of start thinking about, you know, the evolution, and that will come. You know, it's already evolved from what it was. There's no question of that. It's moved even in the last year. But now it's time for us to sort of, if we're going to actually work with the public, if we're going to encourage change in a positive way, then it's got to be done to appeal to the mainstream. That's where the change will come from. You know, not isolated instances and not individual acts necessarily. Although there may be a flashpoint. I mean, we've seen that in countries around the world.
Well, I mean, since we've been speaking about successful internet-based communities, our researcher has said that you're actually one of the co-founders of a UK-based community that's been growing exponentially over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Is there any chance you can tell us a bit about that and the work you do with them?
Yeah, I mean, very straightforwardly. It's called 4UP. It's available on Facebook, easy enough to find. There is a website coming online. 4UP basically stands for and represents the interests of benefit claimants in the UK with a predisposition towards helping people who are either unemployed or disabled or both. We tackle ATOS on a daily basis, and we always find them wanting because we have yet to lose a single appeal. 20 months of operation, every time we've tackled the DWP, we've done so legally, fairly, and we've won. They have no reply because we use just the law. And that in itself is a message. You know, if we understand the law, and the law as it applies, we're talking about statute law, not make-believe law we might like to believe in, but statute law, if we see that and examine it and use it for our own purposes, you know, to defend our rights and our freedoms and our liberties, then we will win through. It's an arduous process on occasions. I totally accept that. You know, nothing. You know, I can't wave a wand and make someone in a wheelchair walk, and no, I can't make a payment into their bank account if they haven't had any benefits for the last 4 weeks. But what I can do is talk them through the process of what's involved for them to be able to get their benefits back. When we first started this, it was a direct response to my own difficulties with the Department for Work and Pensions because they're utter incompetence. And I've challenged it on many occasions. I've challenged Duncan Smith to a live TV debate. He won't take me on, sadly. There may be a day for that, then. Yes, we'll have to wait and see. But the DWP is in a complete state of disarray. Those are terms from the PCS and indeed members deep within the DWP who I have regular contact with. So, you know, we have our sources of information from them too. And we've already seen that the £340 million bandwagon that is PIP and Universal Credit is about to come shuddering to a halt. So that's going to affect many more people, which is why it then impacts on our human rights, and that's one of the reasons that we are working with people like UN Rapporteur Rachel Rolnick, and we're working with other UN ambassadors now to seek greater investigation into what our government has been getting up to, particularly from a human rights point of view, because ultimately human rights legislation is inalienable, which means there isn't a single person in this country that can do anything about it, despite the ramblings of people like Theresa May, who would love to get rid of our Human Rights Act, for which she should be arrested for lying to the public, personally speaking. And the reason for that is straightforward. She thinks that the Human Rights Act derives from the EU, and that pulling out of the EU will take care of it. She is lying, and she knows that she's lying. That's the point, because the Human Rights Act gains and devolves its powers directly from the Council of Europe, which is a separate legislative body altogether, and from which we cannot pull out. So any suggestions in the Mail or the Sun or any of the other newspapers that we're going to abandon the Human Rights Act is a complete fallacy. And to suggest that we are going to do that is deliberately denying people access to their rights. If they think it doesn't exist, then they won't bother even looking for it. So it's, you know, these are things that we need to challenge, and 4UP does challenge on a number of fronts. As I say, mainly it's helping people redress the balance and get their benefits restored, and that works extremely well.
So for people unfamiliar with Anonymous as a collective and also as a movement, perhaps they're passively watching this documentary online at home.
Yep.
How would you describe Anonymous to that person or to those people?
I think it's something that they want to explore. They need to understand why Anonymous has evolved, apart from rather than remaining static. Okay, so it's certainly changed. It's become far more political, I think, in many respects. Even if it isn't saying it's political, most of the people I talk to are clearly political individuals. So if you have an interest from that point of view, then you know there will be groups that service that particular element of interest. There will be other anon groups for other aspects of what Anonymous does. But I think what I would say is that in joining a group, it's always good to stand back a little bit, to see what goes on, to understand the way we communicate with each other, to understand some of the terminology, which on occasions can be blunt, I accept that, but you know that's what it is. So it's not necessarily a place for the faint-hearted.
You have to be aware that a lot of people out there are quite lazy, now quite, like you said, conditioned by their environment, so they just want to know what is it, why are these guys protesting, should I get off my ass and come next
They
year?
should very much get off their off their backsides. But the point is they need to understand why, not just do it for the sake of doing it. There's a purpose behind actually physically being at a protest rather than clicking join on a Facebook group. It means nothing. Clicking join means nothing. Being there is what it's about. Because the more people that are there, right, the more people are saying the same thing. Right? The more people that are saying the same thing, the more people will then say, what's all that crowd about? I'll go and find out. And I'll go and find out. Oh, I like this idea. Or this makes sense. Or I've heard about you. So they're talking now to real live anons. And there should be something like, I don't know, 5, maybe 6,000 there later on this evening. So there's plenty of opportunity for dialogue and engagement.
And so what we're saying today is basically there are problems with the current government or political system.
I think that's accepted. I think that the point is, what do we do about it, and how do we go about it? Those are the next issues. I mean, any course of action has to have, a measurable objective. If it was just merely a question of let's go for a walk for a couple of hours, then that would be a different kettle of fish. That's not where. I don't think that's where it's at. Right? November the 5th is synonymous with all sorts of different issues, and it's been chosen by Anonymous to represent a number of issues, and there are now many, many other organisations and groups who are now joining in with us. We've seen union movements uniting with us today. We're seeing other organisations, people from 4UP obviously are coming on board. So across a wide variety of groups and political interests, the one thing that they all have in common is this government is corrupt and it needs to go. But we need to do it properly and legally.
Can I just ask a quick question? Do you think if the public were well enough informed about the shortcomings of their government, that there would be a hell of a lot more people than what we are currently expecting today?
I think so. I think people need a purpose. They need to have a sense of re-engagement. And you have a country where the last general election, 60% of the country didn't even bother voting. And of the remaining 40% that did vote, half of them are thoroughly fed up with what they're getting for government today. So we have basically an open goal. 80% of the population, 8 out of every 10 voting adults, currently doesn't believe in the government that we have or the political system that it is. So if we can replace that vacuum with something that works, that people would buy into, that makes sense for them as human beings, then that's where the opportunity lies. I mean, do we spend £100 billion on nuclear weapons that we've already got because we haven't used the last lot? Anyway, we can't because we need the Americans' permission. Or do we spend that on better education? Or do we spend that on looking after people who are severely ill, or strengthening the national health service, or any one of a dozen different things? Again, it's a question of budgets and how we spend our money and how we use our resources. From a taxpayer's point of view and from an electorate's point of view, our money and our resources are being wasted left, right and centre by this government, and it has to come to a stop, one way or another. Now, in that sense, we've got another general election coming up in 2015. That gives us time, collectively as individuals, I'm not just talking from an anonymous point of view now, but it gives us time as individuals to share the message with whoever. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. If you see that this government is corrupt, and it is, then we need to make changes. If we don't make changes, we'll only get worse. It's as simple as that. I'm arguing from the point of view of a social imperative. I appreciate there's many things within Anonymous where, given rise, they probably hack the thing to bits, but being sensible, no. The opportunity for change lies in effective communication. We're winning the war on the internet, but we now have to translate that onto a broader mainstream. And if we don't have the press behind us, as we currently don't, then we have to have personal engagement with people in a way that makes sense. That's true enough.
So our current system, the system we're living within at the moment, is a well-organised, well-funded, well-trained, intelligent machine, and we need to get our act together.
True. Absolutely.